In the mid-12th century, England was not the stable monarchy that it would later become. It was a realm fractured by civil war and political uncertainty. The country was still recovering from the Anarchy, a prolonged conflict between King Stephen and Empress Matilda over the succession to the English throne following the death of King Henry I. This civil war, which lasted from 1135 to 1153, had left much of England lawless and divided. Castles had been built without royal approval. Local barons exercised near-independent power. The crown itself held little authority outside the king's immediate court. It was in this period of instability and transition that William Marshal was born. He would go on to serve 5 English kings and become one of the most respected figures in medieval Europe. In a world where treachery was often rewarded and loyalty could be fatal, William Marshal stood apart. He embodied the chivalric ideal more completely than perhaps any other historical figure. Even King Philip II of France, Marshal's rival and enemy, once acknowledged him as the greatest knight who ever lived. Praise like that, especially from across the battlefield, was almost unheard of. But before the accolades, before the legends, William Marshal was just a younger son of a minor noble, without land, without title, and with no obvious path to greatness. William's story begins during one of the darkest chapters of English history. In the year 1146, when William Marshal was likely born, England was still engulfed in the Anarchy, a civil war that had started over a decade earlier. He was born into the household of John Marshal, a powerful and ambitious noble who had played a prominent role in the Civil War. John initially supported King Stephen, then switched his allegiance to Matilda when the opportunity suited him. Later, he returned to Stephen's side, using the chaos of the time to expand his own influence and holdings. In 1152, when William was about 5 or 6 years old, his father became embroiled in a dispute with King Stephen during a siege at Newbury Castle. As part of a negotiated truce, John handed over young William as a hostage, a common practice at the time, used to guarantee the fulfillment of agreements between nobles and the crown. However, John soon broke the terms of the truce. In retaliation, Stephen threatened to hang the boy. According to later chroniclers, John Marshal responded coldly, saying, "I still have the hammer and the anvil to forge more sons." In the end, Stephen did not execute the child. The reasons are unclear. It may have been out of a sense of honor, or perhaps he feared how such an act would be perceived by his own barons. Throughout his life, William Marshal would come to represent the opposite of his father's calculating approach. Where John Marshal was seen as self-serving, William would be remembered as the very image of loyalty and principle. Following his release, William spent his early years preparing for a future that was uncertain, but which would eventually lead him to some of the most powerful courts in Europe. Around the age of 13, he was sent abroad to begin his training as a knight. He joined the household of William de Tancarville, a Norman magnate and hereditary chamberlain of Normandy. This placement was no accident. The Tancarville family were relatives of William's mother and were influential in the Anglo-Norman world. By the time he was knighted in 1166, William Marshal had acquired not just the physical skills of a warrior, but also the personal discipline and social awareness expected of a man who might one day serve in royal courts. By the mid-1160s, William Marshal had proven himself in battle and earned his knighthood. But he was still a knight without land, wealth, or high station. What he needed now was a lord to serve, someone who could elevate him to a higher position within the feudal hierarchy. That opportunity came in 1170, when he was appointed to the household of Henry the Young King, the eldest surviving son of King Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine. The young king had been crowned during his father's lifetime, a rare practice meant to ensure a smooth succession, but he was never granted real power or independent rule. William became one of the chief figures in this circle. His loyalty, martial skill, and ability to conduct himself with grace at court quickly made him a trusted companion. It was also during this time that William began to distinguish himself on the tournament circuit. With the young king's patronage, William participated in tournaments across France, quickly developing a reputation as one of the most skilled and honorable knights in Europe. Chroniclers note that he won so many opponents' horses and gear that that he had to give many of them away simply because he had more than he could manage. His fame grew, and with it the envy of rivals. It was during this period of success that William was accused of impropriety with Margaret of France, the young king's wife and the sister of the French king, Louis VII. The accusation was serious. Margaret was a queen, and William was a knight in close proximity to her court. There is no direct evidence to confirm or refute the charge, but historians generally consider the accusation to have been politically motivated, likely fabricated by jealous courtiers who resented William's influence and popularity. Regardless of its truth, the accusation was damaging. William was removed from the young king's household, a humiliating setback after years of loyal service. But William did not retreat from public life. He insisted on his innocence, and before long the young king himself seemed to believe him. The two men were reconciled, and William was restored to the prince's service. In 1183, the young king launched a campaign in central France, ostensibly part of an ongoing struggle with his father over power and territory. William was by his side during this campaign. But the campaign was cut short when the young king fell gravely ill, likely from dysentery. As he lay dying near Martel in Limousin, he asked William Marshal for a final act of loyalty. The young king had taken the Crusaders' vow years earlier, but had never fulfilled it. On his deathbed, he asked William to take up the cross in his place and journey to the Holy Land on his behalf. Honoring the dying wish of the young king, William Marshal took the cross and set out for the Holy Land. He arrived in the Levant sometime in the mid-1180s, though exact dates are not clearly recorded. Unlike many who traveled east with large retinues and political agendas, William appears to have gone as a simple knight, a pilgrim fulfilling a vow. We know little about the details of his actions during this time. Contemporary sources mention that he served with distinction in the defense of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, though he did not participate in any major battles. By the time he returned to Western Europe, the political situation had changed again. King Henry II was now in the later years of his reign, struggling with a series of rebellions from within his own family. His sons, Richard, Geoffrey, and John, frequently clashed with their father and with each other. The death of the young king had not resolved the dynastic tensions. If anything, it had made them worse. William returned to royal service under Henry II in this period of instability. He was no longer just a knight. His reputation from the tournament circuit, his conduct during the Crusade, and his long record of personal loyalty had earned him a place among the king's trusted circle. In the late 1180s, Richard, supported by King Philip II of France, openly rebelled against his father. It was a decisive struggle for control of the Plantagenet domains in France and England. In 1189, Henry II died at Chinon, defeated politically and betrayed by his closest confidants, including his son, John. William Marshal was reportedly one of the few who remained with the king until the end. With Henry's death, Richard succeeded to the throne as King Richard I. Many in William's position might have faced dismissal or political exile under a new king they had once opposed. But Richard did not forget William's consistent loyalty to the crown itself, regardless of who wore it. Instead of punishing William, Richard rewarded him. In 1189, Richard arranged for William to marry Isabel de Clare, the daughter and heiress of Richard de Clare, also known as Strongbow, and Eoife of Leinster. Isabel was one of the wealthiest heiresses in the Anglo-Norman world. Through this marriage, William gained vast estates in England, Wales, and Ireland. By 1190, William Marshal had reached a position of real power. As the newly created Earl of Pembroke and one of the wealthiest magnates in England, he had the land, the military strength, and the royal trust to influence the course of the kingdom. In the summer of 1190, King Richard I departed for the Holy Land to join the Third Crusade, leaving the governance of his vast domains in the hands of a council of regents. Chief among them in England was William Longchamp, the king's chancellor and the Bishop of Ely, who was given authority to rule in Richard's absence. But almost immediately, tensions began to rise. Longchamp's heavy-handed style and foreign origins made him deeply unpopular among the English nobility. Into this volatile environment stepped Prince John, Richard's younger brother. the same John who had already shown a pattern of scheming against his family. John began to challenge Longchamp's authority, appealing to barons who were disillusioned with the regency. He positioned himself as a natural leader in Richard's absence and hinted that his brother might never return from crusade. Quietly but deliberately, John began laying the groundwork for a power grab. Caught in the middle of this political chess match was William Marshal. Though William had once opposed Richard during the Civil War under Henry II, he had since become one of the king's most loyal servants. At the same time, he maintained cordial relations with John, and his temperament as a mediator made him a key figure in holding the fragile peace between rival factions. Then, in 1192, everything changed. News arrived in England that Richard had been captured and imprisoned by Duke Leopold of Austria while returning from the Holy Land. The ransom demanded was astronomical, 150,000 marks, a staggering amount that would require a national effort to collect. John, seeing an opportunity, intensified his efforts to claim the throne for himself. He began forging alliances with discontented barons and entered into secret negotiations with King Philip II of France. During this period, William Marshal remained outwardly loyal to Richard. He did not join John's rebellion, nor did he aid it. He supported efforts to raise Richard's ransom and quietly worked to prevent outright civil war. When Richard was finally released in 1194 and returned to England, he moved quickly to reassert control. Many of John's allies were punished and some were exiled. But William Marshal once again not betrayed the crown, and Richard knew it. William continued to serve the king loyally during the remaining years of Richard's reign. He joined military campaigns in Normandy and elsewhere on the continent, where Richard spent much of his time defending his territories against Philip of France. Then, in April of 1199, King Richard was fatally wounded during a siege at Chalus in central France. He died shortly afterward, reportedly forgiving John on his deathbed and naming him his heir. John became king. Though many doubted John's ability to rule, William chose to support the new king. Now, as the 13th century began, William Marshal would play an even more critical role in the survival of the English crown. John's rule began with promise, but quickly descended into conflict. His personality, cautious, suspicious, often vindictive, set him apart from his elder brothers. Where Richard had inspired loyalty on the battlefield, John ruled with fear and mistrust. Over time, he alienated many of his barons, lost key territories in France, and made powerful enemies abroad and at home. One of the early tests of his reign came in 1202, when King Philip II of France declared John's continental lands forfeit and supported the rival claim of Arthur of Brittany. Over the next few years, John would lose nearly all the Angevin Empire's holdings in northern France, including Normandy, Anjou, and Maine, territories that had been in English hands for generations. Despite these setbacks, William Marshal remained loyal. He advised John when asked and continued to serve the crown with quiet constancy. John's methods of raising money to fund his lost wars, through heavy taxation, arbitrary fines, and interference with feudal customs, deepened the barons' resentment. His conflicts with the Church, particularly the Pope, over the appointment of the Archbishop of Canterbury, led to England being placed under interdict, and John himself excommunicated. By 1215, tension between the king and his nobles had reached a breaking point. A group of barons, many of whom had once supported him, rebelled and seized London. In June of that year, John was forced to negotiate. At Runnymede, under pressure from his rebellious barons and the Church, King John affixed his seal to what would become one of the most famous documents in English history, the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta was not intended as a revolutionary charter, but rather as a practical solution to immediate political grievances. It attempted to limit the king's ability to levy taxes without consent, interfered with royal justice, and guaranteed certain feudal rights to the nobility. Though it was focused on the barons, it planted the seeds of constitutional thought that would grow in later centuries. William Marshal was present during these negotiations. Though he had not joined the rebellion, he was respected by both sides and played a quiet but essential role in keeping communication open. Almost immediately after agreeing to the Magna Carta, John began preparations to break it. He appealed to Pope Innocent III, who annulled the charter and declared the rebellion illegal. War resumed. The barons, now in open revolt, invited Prince Louis of France, son of King Philip II, to take the English throne. England descended into civil war once again. Amid the chaos, William Marshal stayed loyal to King John. While others defected or shifted allegiances, he maintained his oath. In a desperate attempt to defend his crown, John led military campaigns against the rebels, but in October 1216 he fell ill while campaigning in the east of England. He died at Newark Castle at the age of 49. In his final days, John named none other than William Marshal as protector of the realm and regent to his 9-year-old son, Henry III. At the age of nearly 70, William Marshal assumed responsibility for the kingdom. The situation he inherited was dire. A child king sat on the throne. Much of England was in rebellion. A foreign prince occupied London. William acted quickly. He had young Henry III crowned at Gloucester Abbey. Then, at a gathering of barons and bishops, William knelt before the boy and swore fealty. Many followed his lead. With remarkable political skill, William reissued a modified version of the Magna Carta to win back the rebel barons, removed some of the most contentious clauses, and worked to portray the new regime as one of peace and reform. Militarily, he took decisive action. In 1217, he led royalist forces at the Battle of Lincoln, defeating the French and rebel army in one of the turning points of the Civil War. Later that year, a French fleet was intercepted off the coast at Sandwich, and Louis was forced to abandon his claim. By the end of 1217, the rebellion was over. He continued as regent for the next 2 years, guiding the young king, managing affairs of state, and holding the fragile kingdom together. He died in May 1219 at the age of roughly 72. When William Marshal died in 1219, England mourned not just a nobleman or a warrior, but a man whose life had come to symbolize the very essence of loyalty, honor, and duty. He had served 5 English kings: Henry II, the young King Henry, Richard I, John, and Henry III, surviving through decades of dynastic conflict, foreign wars, rebellion, and civil unrest. King Philip II of France, no ally of England, reportedly said of him, "There is no man so wise or so valiant, so feared or so loved across all Christendom." He lived according to a code of conduct. He made difficult choices and engaged in warfare like all men of his station. But he was remembered as someone who kept his word, respected his enemies, and served faithfully without seeking personal glory above all else. Many historians, and even his enemies, agree, he may well have been the greatest knight who ever lived.